about the concern of the environment as an elitist concern. 1 year ago, I was waitressing in a taco shop in downtown Manhattan. I just got health insurance for the first time a month ago. This is not an elitist issue. This is a quality of life issue. You want to tell people that their concern and their desire for clean air and clean water is elitist? Tell that to the kids in the South Bronx, which are suffering from the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. Tell that to the families in Flint, whose kids have their blood is ascending in lead levels. Their brains are damaged for the rest of their lives. Call them elitist. You're telling them that those kids are trying to get on a plane to Davos? People are dying. They are dying. And the response across the other side of the aisle is to introduce an amendment 5 minutes before a hearing in a markup. This is serious. This should not be a partisan issue. This is about our constituents and all of our lives. Iowa, Nebraska, broad swaths of the Midwest are drowning right now, underwater. Farms, towns that will never be recovered and never come back. And we're here, and people are more concerned about helping oil companies than helping their own families.
In what Bernie Sanders is proposing, you said that Fox was like ushering in the apocalypse with both of you, but to conservatives like me who think that big government is very, very dangerous, it is like the apocalypse. And it's not just that Bernie is asking a lot of voters to buy into what I consider radical ideas like free public college, the Green New Deal, Medicare for all. He's advocating for a complete paradigm shift of the American system as we know it. And it's a huge ask for people like me, and it's a huge ask for a lot of people, this seismic shift from capitalism to socialism.
I think there's one story that's not really being told here is what's actually happening on the ground in America. Do you know what percent of American workers make less than $40,000 a year? Almost 60%. 60% of Americans.
You can't live on that in New York.
You can't live on that in New York, and you can barely live on that anywhere. You can't live on that if you have kids. No. And I think that reality, personally, does require a paradigm shift. This isn't working for us. And a $2.1 trillion tax cut, which has been deemed capitalism at its finest, doesn't work for us.
Right.
You're losing your husband because he couldn't afford insulin because Big Pharma cares about profits more than people, as capitalism at its finest, does not work for us. And I think
Bernie has a hard time explaining how he's going to pay for it, though.
So let's talk about how we'll pay for it, because I think we need to talk about what policies. A tuition-free public college.
$2.2 trillion over 10 years.
So it's funny because progressive policies are always talked about in 10-year price tags. Conservative policies are always talked about in 1-year price tags. And so our military budget increase went up by $70 to $80 billion 1 year alone, about $100 billion, since Trump started, pretty much. Or it's been about $100 billion increase since Trump started. We don't ask how he pays for that. When we talk about big government, we don't talk about big government interjecting themselves into the bodies of women and gender nonconforming people for anti-choice policy. I'm happy to talk about the reduction of government's role in places that I think are harmful, but
tell them how this is getting paid for, because
sure.
Yeah, that's what you want. Right.
So tuition-free public colleges, that can be paid by a simple Wall Street transaction tax. Medicare for all, what you do is that you take your premium and some of your health care costs right now that you give to a Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna, whomever, and you lower that number. The average American family pays about $10,000 in health care costs. You lower that number, and it transitions over to a payroll tax, and the average American gets to save tons more money. There was a Yale study that just came out that said we could transition to Medicare for all and give 2 years severance to every person whose job may be risked in the transition and still save money.
This is AOC making quick work of Meghan
McCain. I'm going to be the bad guy, which I'm sure half the room would agree with anyway. And I want to get away with as much bad things as possible, ideally to enrich myself and advance my interest, even if that means putting putting my interests ahead of the American people. So, Mrs. Hobart Flynn. Oh, and by the way, I have enlisted all of you as my co-conspirators. So you're gonna help me legally get away with all of this. So, Mrs. Hobart Flynn, I want to run. If I want to run a campaign that is entirely funded by corporate political action committees, is there anything that legally prevents me from doing that?
No.
Okay, so there's nothing stopping me from being entirely funded by corporate PACs, say from the fossil fuel industry, the healthcare industry, big pharma. I'm entirely 100% lobbyist PAC funded. Okay, so let's say I'm a really, really bad guy, and let's say I have some skeletons in my closet that I need to cover up so that I can get elected. Mr. Smith, is it true that you wrote this article, this opinion piece for the Washington Post entitled, "These payments to women were unseemly, that doesn't mean they were illegal"?
Well, I can't see the piece, but I wrote a piece under that headline in the Post, so I assume that's right.
Okay, great. So, green light for hush money. I can do all sorts of terrible things. It's totally legal right now for me to pay people off. And that is considered speech. That money is considered speech. So I use my special interest dark money funded campaign to pay off folks that I need to pay off and get elected. So now I'm elected, now I'm in. I've got the power to draft, lobby, and shape the laws that govern the United States of America. Fabulous. Now, is there any hard limit that I have, perhaps Mrs. Hobart Flynn, is there any hard limit that I have in terms of what legislation I'm allowed to touch? Are there any limits on the laws that I can write or influence, especially if I'm based on the special interest funds that I accepted to finance my campaign and get me elected in the first place?
There's no limit.
So there's none. So I can be totally funded by oil and gas. I can be totally funded by Big Pharma, come in, write Big Pharma laws, and there's no limits to that whatsoever.
That's right.
Okay, so awesome. Now, Mr. Mirabani, the last thing I want to do is get rich with as little work possible. That's really what I'm trying to do as the bad guy, right? So is there anything preventing me from holding stocks, say, in an oil or gas company, and then writing laws to deregulate that industry and cause, that could potentially cause the stock value to soar and accrue a lot of money in that time?
You could do that.
So I could do that. I could do that now with the way our current laws are set up. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so my last question is, or one of my last questions, I guess I'd say, is it possible that any elements of this story apply to our current government and our current public servants right now?
Yes.
Yes.
So we have a system that is fundamentally broken. We have these influences existing in this body, which means that these influences are here in this committee shaping the questions that are being asked of you all right now. Would you say that that's correct,
Yes.
Mr. Mirabani or Mr. Schaub?
Yes.
All right, so one last thing, Mr. Schaub. In relation to congressional oversight that we have, the limits that are placed on me as a congresswoman, compared to the executive branch and compared to, say, the President of the United States, would you say that Congress has the same sort of standard of accountability? Is there more teeth in that regulation in Congress on the president, or would you say it's about even, or more so on the federal?
In terms of laws that apply to the president, yeah, there's just almost no laws at all that apply to the president.
So I'm being held, and every person in this body is being held to a higher ethical standard than the President of the United States.
That's right, because there are some ethics committee rules that apply to you.
And it's already super legal, as we've seen, for me to be a pretty bad guy. So it's even easier for the President of the United States to be one, I would assume.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
From New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is recognized for 5 minutes.
It's good to see you, Mr. Zuckerberg. I think you, of all people, can appreciate using a person's past behavior in order to determine, predict, or make decisions about future behavior. And in order for us to make decisions about Libra, I think we need to kind of dig into your past behavior and Facebook's past behavior with respect to our democracy. Mr. Zuckerberg, what year and month did you personally first become aware of Cambridge Analytica?
I'm not sure of the exact time, but it was probably around the time when it became public. I think it was around March of 2018. I could be wrong, though.
Mm-hmm. When did Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg become aware of Cambridge Analytica?
I don't know off the top of my head.
You don't know. Did anyone on your leadership team know about Cambridge Analytica prior to the initial report by The Guardian on December 11th, 2015?
Congresswoman, I believe so, and that some folks were tracking it internally.
And
I'm actually, as you're asking this, I do think I was aware of Cambridge Analytica as an entity earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I was tracking how they were using Facebook specifically.
when was the issue discussed with your board member, Peter Thiel?
Congresswoman, I don't know that off the
You don't. You announced recently that the official policy of Facebook now allows politicians to pay to spread disinformation in 2020 elections and in the future. So I just want to know how far I can push this in the next year. Under your policy, using census data as well, could I pay to target predominantly Black zip codes and advertise them the incorrect election date?
We'll take that content down.
So you will, there is some threshold where you will fact check political advertisements. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, Congresswoman, yes, for specific things like that, where there's imminent risk of harm.
Could I run ads targeting Republicans in primaries saying that they voted for the Green New Deal?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Would I be able to run advertisements on Facebook targeting Republicans in primaries saying that they voted for the Green New Deal? I mean, if you're not fact-checking political advertisements, I'm just trying to understand the bounds here. What's fair
Congresswoman,
game?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think
So you
probably.
don't know if I'll be able to do that.
I think probably.